Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to introduce Dawn Brown. She is the owner and principal designer at Ontario Aesthetic Lighting Design, located here in Brantford, Ontario. She is recognized industry leader in circadian lighting design and is driven by a passion for designing lighting solutions that promote health and wellness. Dawn's 24-year career is defined by her dedication to continuous improvement and willingness, oh, my apologies, willingness uh, to challenge the status quo. She was one of the first lighting designers in Canada to achieve the Certified Lighting Designer credential, adding her name to the CLD database among some of the world's most accomplished designers. Her extensive experience spans multiple sectors and a wide array of buildings, including health and care long-term facilities, luxury residential homes, corporate offices, libraries, and post-secondary education facilities. Take it away, Dawn.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to present. The reason I wanted to present today is because, like you've just heard, I've been doing this for almost a quarter century, and within that time, our approach to lighting and our understanding of the mind-body connection and the impact of lighting on our health and well-being has changed dramatically. It used to be that lighting was just for vision, and there was a strong emphasis on engineering and energy conservation, and that's no longer the case. But our public policies and the way we design lighting for buildings is still based on outdated or ancient theories and technologies. And so my goal here is to provide the general public with more lighting knowledge so that you feel empowered to make better lighting choices, whether you're a consumer or whether you're managing a facility or you're a public policy maker. So with that, I'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to start by answering the question, how do we sense what we see? So like I said before, it used to be that our focus with lighting was just on how do we see? But we also need to factor in how do we sense what we see. And so to understand that, we need to look at what is light. And so light is actually radiant energy. It's vibrations that we sense with our eyes. Light and sound are basically the same thing. They just operate at different frequencies. So if we could hear blue light, it would have a high-pitched sound. It might sound like this. And if we could hear red light, it would have a low-pitched sound. It might sound like this. Each wavelength of energy has a unique sound and triggers a different response. Very much like when we hear the sound of a doorbell, we know to get up and go answer the door. So there are two parts of the brain that deal with light through the eye. And one part is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SEN, which is basically our master clock. And it's responsible for regulating hormones. Its function is basically to say start or stop to hormone production. And you can think of him, or the SEN, as a conductor in a music performance. He's basically setting the timing and setting the tone. And so the same sort of thing happens in our body with our hormones. During the day, we want cortisol production to be fairly high to keep us awake and alert. But at night, we want cortisol production to kind of stop and melatonin production to kick in. And that will help us to feel tired and sleep through the night. And then the second part of the brain that deals with light is the visual cortex. And this is basically the part of the brain that everybody is pretty much familiar with. And the visual cortex converts electrical impulses into images based on memory. So when we see an apple, we know that it's an apple and we know that it's green because we've been taught since childhood that that's an apple, and that color, that sensation we see is an apple, and that's green. So the way it works is light enters the eye. So this is like cutting a section through the eye. So the light enters the eye through the pupil, and it distributes light across the retina. And the fovea is a portion of the eye that is located directly opposite, almost directly opposite the pupil. There, along the back of the retina, there are cells that are called photoreceptors. And our photoreceptors basically convert light into a chemical that is passed to the brain via an optic nerve or optic nerves. So when our environment is bright, our pupils actually get smaller in order to focus the light onto the fovea. And then when our atmosphere is dim or dark, our pupils dilate, get larger in order to spread more light across the entire retina, all in the effort to help us see better. And now, as we age, what happens is our pupils do not expand and contract as much. And so we become more sensitive to glare. And it takes us a longer time to adapt between spaces that are bright and dark. Like, for example, if you go into a dimly lit restaurant in the middle of the afternoon, you have to stop for a second and let your eyes adjust before you're able to see well. So as we get older, that time period that it takes us to adjust gets longer. And then our photoreceptors actually lose power. So that means we lose the ability to distinguish between colors of similar hue. So as we get older, it becomes more difficult to tell the difference between, a blue sock and a black sock, for example. The same is true for like orange and red and shades of green. And then our lens tends to yellow, and that filters out blue wavelength energy. And that has a definite impact on our circadian rhythm and our suprachiasmatic nucleus being able to manage the timing of our hormone production. So there are basically 5 different types of photoreceptors. There's the IPRGCs, our rods, and then we have 3 different types of cone receptors, L cones, M cones, and S cones, and I'll get into each of these. To make it easier to understand, this is how I kind of interpret things, so I'm letting you into a little bit of my personality here. But I think of IPRGCs as the chicken little of the eye. They run around and they are in tune with the sky, and they're like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. So they have a peak sensitivity in the sky blue region of the spectrum, and they control our pupil size. And they speak to all the other photoreceptors. It's like a little bit of a communication loop that's going on between them. And they also speak to our master clock, or the SCN. Our rods, they're like our Avengers, or the Avengers. They tell us, watch out. They're responsible for our peripheral vision. And they're most sensitive to light within the blue-green range of the spectrum. And they're highly sensitive at low light levels when the pupils are wide open. And they speak to our visual cortex, but they do not speak to our master clock. L cones basically just tell us that's red. And you would think that they would have a peak sensitivity in the red portion of the spectrum, but they actually have a peak sensitivity in the yellow portion of the spectrum. Our M cones tell us that's green. They're sensitive in the green area. Our S cones tell us that's blue, and they are sensitive in the darker portion of the blue spectrum. So altogether, they form our color vision. They're grouped together primarily in the fovea, the center of the retina. And they're responsible for, of course, color vision, but they're also responsible for fine detail and depth perception, which is critical for seeing, especially at low light levels. And they all talk to the visual cortex. The only photoreceptor that actually talks to our master clock is the IPRGCs, or the chicken little of the eye. So that leads me to my next question that I'd like to answer is, what's inner light? And it might seem like an unusual question to ask because light is light, isn't it? Well, not exactly. So daylight contains all the colors of the spectrum. And what you're looking at here is basically a graph that we call a spectral power distribution. It tells us how much of each color is contained within a light source. The shaded portion here represents the portion of the spectrum that basically caters to our visual system. And this is what we base our lighting measurements off of, our traditional lighting measurements for all design. It's only been recently discovered, Chicken Little and our IPRGCs, that they are sensitive to this portion of the spectrum. And so it doesn't really hold much weight in our traditional approach to designing products and stuff. And so this is the spectrum of an LED, or a traditional cool white LED. There's typically a spike in blue content and a dip in the cyan region. And the reason for this is because it allows for a higher lumen per watt rating of our LEDs. And our industry has been fixated on energy conservation for the past 50 years. And so this is the driving force now behind product development, whereas we actually need to boost this. And so now there are some manufacturers that are producing LEDs that have a significantly higher content of sky blue. And that helps to stimulate our circadian rhythm well for people who can't necessarily go outside all of the time. So. And then tragically, this is fluorescent. And this is what a lot of people grew up under, worked under, and lived under all of their lives. And human beings spend almost 90%, and this is typical all over the world, 90% of their time indoors. And so you can only imagine how much of a disconnect people who spend that amount of time inside have with that circadian rhythm and that natural day-night cycle. So it's this that causes a lot of the health issues that we see today with ADHD and even obesity, because our light production regulates our sensation to eat or stop eating, our feelings of hunger. So the quality of the light we now know is extremely important. And so we ask the question, what is in our light? The next question I'd like to answer is, how much light do we need? And so there are a few tables here that I'm going to present, and the units that these numbers represent are lux, which basically is the amount of light that falls onto a surface. And but I don't want to get boiled down into lux definition right now. I can explain that later in the presentation. with these next few slides, I just want to point out the dramatic difference in light intensity that we need for people who are over the age of 65. In a typical kitchen, our general lighting for the space is like 300 lux, whereas for the general population, it's only 50. Food preparation, which is like a task area, it's about the same. And our task areas for dining are also the same, but even night light, we older people require a lot more light, like 10 times more light. And so this really impacts our approach to design because now we have to manage that light. In a typical bathroom, our lighting that comes at our face is critical, but if it's so bright, it's really potentially that it can be very uncomfortable. And so for this reason, we need to focus on how do we provide this amount of light without becoming uncomfortable. And then again, reading in bed, like how do you provide that like 750 lux versus 200 lux for the average person? That's a lot more light than the traditional approach. So we need dedicated professionals to address these concerns. So the next question you might be thinking is, okay, well, not every building is a brand new project. How do I know as a homeowner, how much light do I have to work with right now? And so there are a lot of different apps that you can download onto your phone. If you're not technically savvy, you might be just get some help with this from like your grandkid or your kids. But basically you can download these apps through like Google Play or Apple Store or whatever. But just make sure you kind of have a look at the terms and conditions. Different ones have different conditions like ads and stuff maybe that accompany them. But I like this one because it tells you how much light you're going to have, but then it gives you an ability to convert into different units and stuff. And then it also has a section where it gives you an idea of how much light you should be expecting for different spaces. And just keep in mind that these apps are not like they're only as good as the quality of your phone. Like they're not a replacement for a properly calibrated meters, but at least it gives you an idea of where you're starting from and where you should be. And the light measurements that or the recommended light levels that you're going to get from an are for the general population, and the Illuminating Engineering Society is basically the governing source for the actual numbers that designers work with. So how much light are we actually going to get when we go looking for products? So before we even go out and look for products, we need to understand a few different terminologies. The term lux and foot candles are basically the same. Lux is just a metric version, and foot candles is the imperial version. So if you're dealing with meters and millimeters, you're in lux. If you're dealing with feet and inches, you're in foot candles. And this is called a luminance. Luminance is light that falls onto a surface. A reflectance is the difference or the ratio between how much light is going to fall onto the surface and how much is going to bounce off. And that ratio determines whether or not we perceive that space to be bright. And so brightness in the lighting world, we give a completely different term. We call brightness luminance. So lux and foot candles are called illuminance, and brightness is called luminance. And our typical reflectances for rooms that we design to, because chances are you're not going to know what those values are right off in the beginning, or it's just 80% for ceilings, 50% for walls, and 20% for floors. our regulatory agencies have tried to help protect or inform the consumer about what is in the box by providing these lighting facts labels. And they're somewhat handy because if you're going to compare or if you're out there looking for an LED bulb that is going to give you the same amount of light as, let's say, in this example, it's a 60-watt regular light bulb, which we call like incandescent, then we'll know that by looking at that incandescent bulb package that that type of light gives out 820 lumens. So that's the intensity of light that is going to come out of that product. And then if we compare that to the LED one, it's only going to give us 300. So we know that this is not necessarily an equivalent to that. It's not going to give us as much light. And then they're really big on like making sure people understand that there's a difference between energy consumption. So they're going to give you an idea of how much this is going to cost you, because they really don't want people to use incandescent anymore, because the industry is focused on energy use. But there is a place for incandescent, and it can be managed well in order to maintain energy. So just keep that in mind. But then they're also trying to give us an indication of the color quality. Now on the incandescent label, for some reason, they didn't show the CRI, the color rendering index, and I'll talk about what each of these things are in a minute. But they do give us an indication of whether it's warm or cool, which is the color temperature. And you'll see that with the LED product as well. But then when you're comparing LED product to LED product, there's really not much of a difference in terms of their lumens per watt value. So when you're comparing LED product to LED product, you're really going to be looking at like, how much am I getting? What is the color quality, and whether it's warm or cool. And so warm, you want more for the evening. Cooler, you might want for more of your daytime spaces. Now, lumens. What are lumens? So you can think about lumens as potential light output of your bulb. The drawback is that that's all we know, is the potential that's there. So as a designer, what we look for, designers look for something called candelas, or a candela distribution curve out of a fixture. And candelas tell us a direction. They give us an indication of how much light is actually going to come out of the fixture in a specific way. The traditional, we call this an A-shaped or an A lamp or A bulb. Bulb and lamp are the same thing. It's just in lighting world, we call them lamps. We don't call them bulbs. So this on the left is a typical, what we would call omnidirectional. So it's just giving us a blob of light into the space. It's just going to go wherever. Whereas the one on the right is actually a spotlight, and we know that it's going to have a specific beam angle. It's going to distribute the light in kind of a triangular pattern or a cone pattern. And so it's going to have a specific beam angle, and it's going to have a specific intensity at the center. So those metrics we use in order to understand the performance of that bulb or that lamp. And we take that to fixtures as well. So correlated color temperature is basically, as I said before, warm or cool of the warmness or coolness of the light. CRI is how well the light source renders different colors. And most light sources do a great job of rendering blues, and except incandescent, which doesn't render blue very well, but has more of a difficult time rendering reds accurately. So LED doesn't necessarily render reds as well. And to be honest, like CRI is kind of an outdated metric. There's a lot in our design world, there's much more accurate metrics, but they're complicated. And so for the general public to understand, the CRI metric has continued. But the thing that you're going to want to know is that you're never going to want to use any light source that has a CRI value of less than 80. So back up, the closer the CRI value is to 100, the better the color quality. And so, and then the color temperature and the CRI value are codependent. So if you change one, you're not necessarily going to be able to have that same color quality in terms of color rendering. Okay, and this becomes important when you're dealing with new technologies that allow you to adjust the color temperature. So when you adjust the color temperature, just know that you might lose quality in your color rendering capability. So how do we apply all of this knowledge? How do we maintain visual comfort in a space? So glare is, kind of the thing that we designed to avoid. It's our major motivator, I guess, in terms of design, and it's governed by three things. The size of the light source. The larger a light source is, the more potential there is for glare. The brightness of the light source in comparison to the area around the source. And so the greater that differential, the higher the chances of it being glary. And then the location of the light source within our field of view. So the closer the light source is to the center of our field of view, the higher potential there is for discomfort or glare. So we want to manage this. And I chose this image because it's a good representation of how we used to design lighting. Basically, you would think, oh, okay, I need a certain amount of light at the task plane, the IES, look up the number, how many light fixtures do I need in my room in order to accomplish that? That is no longer the way we do things, because we end up in situations like this. And I think we've all been in rooms like this where the overhead lighting is just so uncomfortable because there just hasn't been any thought put into it. Here is an example of what we actually need to do, and what lighting designers will do is we will work with the interiors people and the architect to integrate the lighting into the space. What you're seeing here is an example of indirect lighting. So if we can bounce the light off of the ceiling and into the space, it's much more comfortable for the occupants. Another source of glare is windows. So typically on the east side or the west side of the building, the lighting in the morning and the evening can be very strong and cause a lot of discomfort. So in our homes, it's easy. We just have curtains that or blinds that we open and close ourselves. But in a commercial space or commercial atmosphere, we need something that doesn't require human intervention. And the reason for that is because we tend to just leave the blinds closed all the time. And that's not good for our health and wellness, because then we end up with that disconnect again and between natural light in the natural environment and our interior environment. And that we know causes a lot of health issues. So the most challenging portion of the home to design is the vanity. And so here are a couple of rules that will help make vanity lighting a little bit more comfortable, but maintain its effectiveness. So your vanity lighting should always have a diffused globe or shield on it to diffuse the light. And then if you're able to, if you're doing like a new home renovation, add in some sort of secondary light source. So i.e. typically if I'm doing a design, I'll put a downlight, which is also known as a pot light or a can light, over top of the sink. And so that by adding that second light, I don't necessarily need my vanity lights to be as intense. So I'm sharing the load between the two light sources. What we never want to have, especially in any space for seniors, are bare light bulbs with clear lenses. These are extremely, these are a no-no. They're just uncomfortable. So when we're designing, we talk about layers of light. We always want to have at least 3 layers of light. So general ambient lighting. We want to have accent lighting, and we want to have task lighting. And so in this picture, the general ambient lighting is being provided through the drums, and they're just kind of filling the space with some light. We don't want those drums to be the only light source in the space, or else they're going to need to be super intense and they'll be uncomfortable. So we need to couple that with some accent lighting through sconces, and so we're not so dependent on our drums. And then we add this 3rd layer of task lighting that can be increased or raised in intensity to provide lighting directly onto the tabletops and when we have dinner or whatever. And we enclose all of this with lighting controls, which I'm not going to get too far into, but basically these are these layers of light that we typically will have in a space. And so in a residential environment, your decorative fixtures are going to be contributing to the ambient lighting. And in this photo, they also have a cove light, and that will contribute and distribute the amount of light that we need so that each component doesn't have to be so bright. And then we're going to put some light onto the walls, and then we're going to make sure we integrate lighting into the shelving or wherever it is to provide task lighting so that we can read labels and stuff like that. So then light at night. So basically during the day, we want things to be super, super bright, but we also need to have darkness at night. Darkness is just as important. And so in this section, I'm going to introduce you to Alan. So who's Alan? Well, Alan isn't a person, it's a thing. So Alan stands for artificial light at night. And this is what we really need to manage because we are super sensitive to light at night. And we ideally want to sleep in as close to complete darkness as possible. And this is not just human beings. This is all of the little critters out there in the world. And so organizations like Dark Sky Association, they kind of are advocating for all of our wildlife and protecting our night skies. So Alan is something we want to avoid, artificial light at night. So in our homes, we always want to have a means of blocking out any light that's going to come in from outdoors. So we're going to want to have a nice thick shading system or even a layered shading system that will allow us to make the room as dark as possible. And then we're going to introduce layers of light, like I talked about, and we're going to want the lighting to be very warm. I wouldn't go above any more than 3000 K for a bedroom. And you're going to have a separate light. Like in this example, this is maybe a little bit higher end, but different ways of going about it. There are different ways of going about it to provide your task lighting for reading. So, and then in this example, they have some accent lighting hitting the walls and stuff, and just to make the space feel more comfortable in the evening. And here are a little bit of tricks that I use in my own home in order to manage all of the lighting that is more economical than what we would do for, you know, luxury residential or a commercial project. In a commercial project or luxury residential is a brand new construction, you'd probably be looking at some sort of sophisticated lighting control system with the app that integrates with your home automation system. And it sounds complicated, but if it's designed well, it'll be easy for you. It makes your life easier. But if you're in an existing situation or an existing home or an older home where you just can't have that, these are some strategies I like to use. So there are these little outlets that you can plug into the wall, and they can come with a little remote control to turn each one of them on or off. There's more sophisticated versions of this too, but for the presentation, I just included these. You can get them even from Walmart or Amazon. Um, Lutron, and I'm not affiliated with Lutron in any way, but they just make really great dimming products and lighting control products. They have a version of this plug that comes with the little remote that you can dim your lighting. So, um, but if you're going to dim, you're going to want to make sure that you're using a bulb or a lamp that is marked as a dimmable LED. If you try to dim an LED bulb that is not marked as dimmable, it's going to flicker. So just keep that in mind. And then I like this product from Lutron, this particular dimmer, because it's nice and big. It has a big dial on it and a separate switch. So example of how this could be useful is in a bathroom, let's say. If you are using the washroom during the day, you can just put the dimmer on full output and then flick the switch and everything is nice and bright. But then if you're going to use the washroom in the middle of the night, you can just pull that down before you flick the switch on, and you're not, shocked by the bright lighting within your washroom, and everything's all in one. So these are available at like Home Depot and whatnot. So that's another option. And then I really also like this little device here in the top right hand corner. It's an extension cord basically for lamps and stuff that will allow you to dim them or set the dimming level. And so you could imagine if you were to plug your light into this extension cord and then plug that into your switchable outlet, then you could preset basically your lamp to be, more dim than what you actually need it to be. And that's maybe you have some sort of a strategy that you use in order to kind of make your home lighting environment suit your personal preferences and needs. And so then night light, if you're going to go with the plug-in night light, this is what I would recommend. Something that takes those little incandescent bulbs, because incandescent actually has very low blue light content in it, and it's less disruptive to our sleep. So I mean, you can get LED that also does that too, but for the average consumer, you're not going to be able to know that. So anything that can kind of take those old-fashioned incandescent nightlight bulbs is a good thing. And I like the nightlights that have a little switch on them, because the less you use it, the longer these little bulbs last and the less you have to buy. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much. If you have any questions after today's presentation, or you just want a copy of the slideshow, feel free to email me. My email address is dbrown@oald.ca, and I'll open it up for questions.